start now and people will keep joining. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Eli Tenenbaum. I'm the head of the Security Studies Center at IFRI, the French Institute of International Relations, and I am very pleased to host today a great panel on the war in Ukraine and strategic land power in Europe, organized around the question of learning the right lessons from this war, and I think we're going to have the occasion to state that there are a number of lessons to be learned here. Probably lessons that are the right lessons and lessons that should not be overestimated. This conference could not have been possible without, of course, the help of COJAS events and Eurosatory, which I think here, but also that of the Association of the United States Army, and especially Colonel Peter Hurley here that I salute, and to whom I am especially thankful for helping us setting this panel together. To be totally transparent, we initially had a different subject in mind when we started to think about this event back in January. We wanted to work on the role of strategic land power in strategic signaling. And then, of course, the outbreak of the war on February 24th and the way it unfolded sort of, pushed us to say they're probably more than signaling here and actual fighting. And so many surprises. It became clear that if we wanted to have a relevant starting point for thinking about the future of land forces, land power in Europe, the lessons from Ukraine were really the needed starting point here. And I could not have wished to have a more fitting panel to discuss this issue with three outstanding experts here. First and foremost, on my left is U.S. Army Major General Matthew Van Wagenen. He's just taken office as Deputy Chief of Staff at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe at SHAPE, where he's going to be responsible for monitoring strategic environment and managing current operations for SACEUR, basically, as we said, a big J3 overseeing as well as part of J2 and J5, as I understand, at SACEUR, at SHAPE. And before that, Major General Van Wagenen had a rich career as an armored officer with multiple deployments overseas, especially in Afghanistan. But closer to our topic, in the U.S. Army, he served multiple posting at NATO and most recently until last week as Deputy Commanding General of the U.S. 5th Corps as forward command post in Poznan, Poland, where he was at the forefront of the deterrence and defense mission of the alliance land component, but also before that he underseen some training, support, and assistance missions for the Ukrainian forces, alongside with its UK and Canadian counterparts in Ukraine, and so very, very interesting insights, I think, here on the war in Ukraine. Then more to my left, French Army Major General Pierre-Joseph Givre. He's now the head of the Doctrine Directorate of the Army, the CDC, at the French Army here in Paris. Prior to that, General Givre has had a rich and colorful career as mountain infantryman, mountain troops officer, commanding the well-known 27th Mountain Infantry Brigade until the summer of 2020. He served in many operations overseas as well, especially in Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Mali. And General Givre is also what we may call a soldier scholar, as he's published a number of books and articles in military strategy, and recently piece on the lessons from the war in Ukraine that I really think is most insightful and to be learned from the French Army, and he'll be giving us some sort of French Army perceptions of the war going on. And last but not least, Dr. Dmitry Minik is a research fellow at my institute, at IFRI, which has its own Russian and NIS center. He holds a PhD in History of International Relations from Sorbonne University with various grants from the Ministry of Armed Forces. He was also a consultant for the DGRES, or sort of OSD equivalent in France, and working on energy security in Eurasia and North America. But his PhD topic as a Russian-speaking expert, I think, is especially relevant here. It was on Russian strategic thought in the face of the evolution of war between 1993 and 2016. A matter that will be, of course, at the core of our discussion in trying to understand what have the Russians been up to so far, and what may they do in the future. Okay, so what I propose you to do now is maybe to start with General Van Wagenen to have some opening remarks on this general matters, and then we may go through what we call a NATO Poland, a typical sort of red, green, and blue analysis, looking at our understanding of, opponent force posture and strategies, obviously the Russian side, looking at what the Ukrainian performance in defending their country has been, and then what is the future of the alliance. Force posture, especially in the land dimension, the land domain that we are especially covering today. General Van Wagenen, let's hear you, and I yield you the floor.
No, thanks, I appreciate it. First of all, I want to say thanks to IFRI and AUSA for the opportunity to speak at the panel this morning. It's vital, I think, we reflect on what's happening in the Ukraine to learn the right lessons from it, and not false lessons or lessons that we want to learn. We in NATO, the West, the Alliance, I think we need to exercise humility and cultivate a desire to learn at all levels. And this requires challenging existing assumptions, concepts, and capabilities. And that's what this forum here, and that's what Eurosatory does. And that's why I'm surrounded by some esteemed colleagues here as we kind of deep dive on the Ukraine today. I think there's a danger in falling for a narrative portrayed in Western media. We're hearing sometimes, I think, what we want to hear, that the Russians are being poorly led, they're making too many tactical mistakes, they're advancing slowly. I'd ask you this morning as we talk about it. Is this really the case? Is this really a holistic view of what's going on over there? I think 5 big takeaways that we'll discuss today from what's happened over there in the reinvasion of the Ukraine by the Russian Federation. First one is combined arms maneuver is still fundamental to combat operations from the lowest level at the company and COI to the higher level. Maneuver is essential to consolidate battlefield gains, and this is vital for offensive and defensive operations. Sensors all over the battlefield, and you must maneuver to survive. That fundamental concept has not gone away. And I think in the early days of the Ukraine, we saw a lack of combined arms maneuvers on both the Ukrainian front and the Russian Federation. I would tell you the second thing here, and this is probably an unpopular one, is mass matters. The threat of EW, cyber, and drones is no substitute for mass. This is vital for offensive and defensive operations. So it is directly imperative. The number of soldiers you can put on a battlefield makes a difference. The third one is, and we're seeing right now in a very unpleasant form, is attrition warfare is here to stay. As the war progresses, you see 2 things: Russian limited maneuver and higher resilience on fires to do one thing, and that's to attrit Ukrainian forces. Attrition is as old as warfare itself. It is here to stay probably for the next 50 to 100 years, as much as we want to wish it away. The fourth thing I think that we didn't say earlier that is still essential is unity of command. This was evident in the early stages of the war for the Russians. The inability for one commander to control tempo, speed, and prioritize objectives is still important. The Russians paid a high toll for this early on, but I think they've adjusted to that. The last one is poisonous assumptions. There were many poor assumptions made at all levels. The Russians assumed President Zelensky would flee, causing the military and the government to collapse. People would welcome there. Dress uniforms were found packed in personnel carriers as they were taken on early days of the invasion. Red teaming is still important. War gaming, more rigor and planning is absolutely essential. And these are fundamental staff skills that can't be delegated down to AI or the other systems. So staff planning still matters. I'll close on those opening comments here and turn it over to my esteemed colleague there, Major General GB.
Thank you, General. I think these are great comments that really start with thought-provoking views, and yes, I think we'd be thrilled to hear what are the from General Gives's point of view and the French Army's point of view. Do you share this perception? So combined arms maneuver, I know that has been key to the training of the French Army in the changing mass attrition, unity of command planning. How do you see that? Do you see other striking elements, especially for focusing on your own assessment of what the Russians have been up to and what they're trying to achieve and what they haven't?
Okay, thank you, Eli, for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be here, and I think it will be very interesting, and your foremost words were already very interesting for us, and I share most of your comments. First of all, I will go maybe deeper and more precisely, but just one thing very important, as we are allies, we are very close, interoperable, and so on, but there are some differences, and we have to anytime to keep in mind. This is the scale of both our land forces. I will not discuss about the Russians, but we could discuss, but also between the Americans and the French, and also our geographic location and history, and what about our strategic, also most of the time shared with us, with you, strategic imperatives, and there are many consequences on the way we will assess the lessons from Ukraine, because we have to anytime to keep in mind that we are different. We will have to most of the time to fight alongside, but we are also different, and Europe is different from your perspectives. I will not speak about strategy in Indo-Pacific, for example, but there are many differences, and the scale of your armed forces, your capabilities are very different. Therefore, it's very important for us, of course, to share our analysis, but anytime to have our own conclusions. Because we are not the same. For me, very, very important. I think in that sense we are very complementary. And there is a risk. The risk is to align everybody on the same model. But your model, we will not be able to sustain it anytime. That's a very, very important point. Okay, when it comes to the stunning points I have observed, first of all, I will say that I would say that the Russians are still very good at strategic level. They have been very, very good prior to the shaping for the operation in Ukraine. And we have never to forget that, and there are many consequences, including for the land forces. Then we have to be anytime vigilant with the Russians, even the war has not been officially triggered. And it was the case in Africa. We have seen the Russians very, very active with Wagner, prior to the conflict in Ukraine. And once it will be stopped, or the truce will happen there, I think there will be very dynamic elsewhere once again, and maybe on the French territory and in Europe once again. First of all, I have a mixed feeling about their operational capabilities. I think the initial plan was too much audacious for the Russians. The Russians are not audacious. They have make a bet, and they have lost by attacking Kiev. It was a big error, strategic and operational also. They have dispersed their capabilities. But having said that, once they have understood the failure, their error, they have been very, very agile to rearticulate their disposition at the operational level. It has been outstanding in 1-2 weeks, very, very quickly. And I consider they are weak at the tactical level. I maintain it, despite because now they have changed the way. Now they stick to the doctrine. Initially, they didn't stick to the original doctrine. No change of the doctrine, anytime the same. And now they come back to carpet bombing, very static, and they are very good at that, but it's not at the tactical level. They are not maneuverist. Definitely, I don't think so. Some units, but not for the reasons we could develop later on. The second point is they are predictable. frankly speaking, you have assessed it at the through your intelligence. But I've not seen any kind of surprise so far. But maybe somebody could give me another view. But they are predictable.
At the operational and tactical level.
Yeah.
Strategic level, I mean, they were kind of surprising.
They are more creative.
Yes.
But okay. I think they are incapable of maneuverist approach. It's only attrition warfare and massive use of firepower. Well, okay, something classical in some ways, like in Grozny, for example, like in Syria indirectly. And I was surprised. It's mostly kinetic. It's not. They combine non-kinetic and kinetic at the strategic level, but they didn't do as so far. What I can observe, it's not the same agility at the operational and tactical level in that sense. The combination of the two. Third point is rigid and centralized C2. Definitely, I don't say that like you that they are not good at commanding and so on, but it's very rigid, very vertical, hierarchical, because it's the societies. It's the way they don't trust anybody. Then therefore the commander will not trust the subordinates. They don't have NCOs. And the fourth point is, they are resilient, definitely. And we have compared them to us, then saying, okay, they have some difficulties with the cohesion. No, they are very cohesive at all the levels. They have some deserters and so on. But I've heard that the Ukrainians, they also have some difficulties for now. They're very good. And the Russians, they can suffer a very long time. They are used to that, except in some very high classes level. But they have left. All the rest of the society, they are very supportive so far. But I think they can endure on the long term. And on the terrain, this is the same. And the last point, and maybe it could be a debate. Standoff is not decisive. SOD, EBO, this is very interesting for the analysis of the situation. Of course, you have to target if you can. But at the Ukrainian level, no targets for the Russians, or not a lot. And the harsh campaign with standoff has not been absolutely not decisive. You have to take control of each inch of the terrain. And therefore, I don't say that we don't have to invest in standoff, big standoff. It will also connect to MDO. Yes. We could discuss it later on, but this is not decisive. What is decisive is when you take the initiative on the ground. This is the most challenging, biggest challenge. It's not technology, but it's partly technology. Partly technology, it's a combination. It's an art of war. That's all for the main.
Thank you, and I recognize the contact warfare dimension, which is key to the French army identity here, and of course a lot to discuss. But I take your point on the differentiating their strategic performance, operational and more tactical. And I turn now to Dimitri, because you've worked a lot on post-Cold War Russian strategic thought, and how do you explain that Moscow's eventual decision to resort to brute force frontal attack on February 24th, in spite of all the talk that we've had over the last decade or so about new generation warfare, hybrid threats, under the threshold kind of attack, subversion, etc. We were preparing for another kind of war, and finally what we got is as Gilles said, kind of classic conventional force and force strategy. How do you see that? How do you read it?
Thank you, Elie, for your question. I'm very happy to be here in such good company. I think that we have to explain the Putin's decision to massively invade Ukraine. I think we should focus on the traditional and deep-rooted mindset and beliefs of the Russian political military elites embodied by Putin, and which are prone to disconnect them from the objective reality. And paradoxically, their hostile perception of the world contributed to elaborate. To elaborate, an indirect strategy based on a rational analysis of war, of power balance, quite compatible with the strengths and the weaknesses of Russia. But on the other hand, this perception of the world, of the Russian political military elites, is so anxiogenic and phantasmatic that it can distance the actor who carries it from a long-term and global assessment of the political strategic situation. And such perception of the world led the Kremlin to make very counterproductive and emotional decisions, like all Soviet and Putin's Russia history has broadly proven. And I think that Putin was blinded by two beliefs, typical of two feelings produced by these cognitive frameworks. The first one is the overconfidence, because Putin analyzed the American retreat from Afghanistan like the sign of a decisive decline of the Western domination around the world. And the second feeling is the impression of an imminent collapse among the Russian political military elites, because according to them, Russia is undermined and subverted by the West in order to achieve the dismembering of Russia began with Cold War. And to finish, I think that from that point of view, there was some fundamental disagreements among these elites on the strategy to adopt in Ukraine. But I think there were not substantive disagreements on the doctrinal plan. According to these elites, the West and the world are hostile to Russia. Russia is a great power, a unique power, which is a target of very greedy countries around the world, which want to exploit its resources and so on.
Okay, I think that we have a fair strategic assessment here. Do you want to rejoin on this, or I also wanted to go a bit into the rabbit hole of maneuver fundamentals, as you said, and combined armed tactics. Interestingly, we have here two generals, one infantry and one armored, and there's been this, deep question in the way we've seen combat over the last weeks and month about the offense-defense ratio here, and how do you assess the role of or the state of the status of this ratio? We've seen very expensive T-90, T-80s, T-72s being destroyed by infantry platoons, well organized with anti-tank guided missiles and stuff like that. If we go into this rabbit hole of maneuver warfare and combined armed tactics, what are the main striking lessons that you think that maybe worth taking, or maybe it's the wrong lessons to be learned here, because it's not so much the force ratio than the way it's been used by either one of the general or either one of you.
Just one comment about your comment about the Russian society, mentality, and so on. There is one point on the French perspective. We have to be very, very careful about the assessment we make on our competitors, adversaries, enemies. Our tendency is just to consider us as superior, because technologically speaking, because our political system and our reference are not as good. I think our enemies are anytime cognitively superior to us, because they are in a defensive position. They consider that they are weaker than we are. Then they compensate their technological weakness or their weaponry weakness through thinking differently. And the point, and we try. This is a red team issue you mentioned, but we have to be very, very careful. I come back, and you see, it's not the topic, but this is the topic. I come back from Africa. Africa is changing in 2-3 years. For the Ukrainians, in 2014, they were in very bad conditions. And they have changed mindset. They have changed, so they have been helped and supported, but they have changed many things. And the society in less than 10 years has dramatically changed in a way that they are now far more resilient and far more, the cohesion is better. Then the Russians, they can change also, even if maybe there are more frictions. And and that's a big point. Let's be careful about that sense, and psychology is not objectivity, and then we have to work a lot in that field, because it is the area where most of our adversary will invest a lot to offset our capabilities. When it comes to the ratio of force, it's very classical. What I can say that this is mass versus quality. I think the Americans, that's why I mentioned that you are a little bit we are different from you. You can afford to have a mass and quality. I don't think we can afford that in Europe. And look at all the formats of the land forces in Europe. There's a huge volume, but very small capabilities.
Still, would you say that the French assessment of the war would maybe just tip a very little, the balance of quantity versus quality ratio? Because this is, of course, a key issue, and there have been, parliamentary investigation about the ammunition levels and all that. Are we going to go a bit towards this mass matters lesson from?
For me, this is the biggest issue. It's not only a budgetary issue. It's also an industrial issue and technological issue and sovereignty issue in that field. What is the best economic model? And for now, there are many industrials here. They need the fundings for the research and so on to be considering that the cutting-edge technologies are not only necessary for the military, but also for the development of our economy on a dual perspective. And that is, frankly speaking, for our countries, this is the problem. Because we see at the military, we need quality, but we need also mass. Is it compatible with the economic model we have? And the investment the state want to develop? That, for me, this is the biggest problem. If I will only be a military, I will say, okay, mix the two. Definitely mix the two. We need more mass, but we need also quality, because quality is survivability, is precision, is more agility and swiftness. That's the point. Having said that, the ratio, when you see in mobile combat, mobile fighting, agility, technoguerrilla can compensate heavy firepower, and we have seen in the first phase of the war in Ukraine. But when it comes static, as it is in the front line in Donbass, definitely this is the mass and the massive firepower that is determinant, despite your agility, despite your maneuverist approach, despite maybe your intellectual superiority in the art of war. And that is a big point. This is the mix of legacy, conventional, and we have to, definitely for us, the French, to enhance our stocks, ammunition, and number of tubes, or guns, for example. We have less than 100 artillery guns. It's definitely not enough, even if we are smarter or consider ourselves smarter than the others.
And we gave a dozen to the Ukrainians, by the way.
Yeah, it looks very efficient. The next staircase are a very good one.
General Van Wagenen on this, and then maybe we'll turn to the Ukrainian side and our assessment of that.
Well, I think there's two camps, and some of it's informed by recent history in the alliance and NATO. One is the belief that by many countries that we can substitute hard power for cyber, robots, EW, and we can begin to disinvest in stuff like heavy artillery, armor, and infantry. And it's a belief, much driven by appropriators, is scarce resources in a lot of countries. What does it go to? Does it go to social programs? Does it go to education? Or do you invest in hard power and investment? I think over the last years, many fell asleep, believing the kind of warfare that we're seeing in the Ukraine right now would never happen again in Europe. And here we are in 2022, and the attrition warfare is going on in Western Europe again. This is significantly different. And I think what it's going to force many governments to go back and look at is, what are those investments in defense that have been made or need to be made? And, what is force posture going to look like in the land domain inside of Western Europe over the next 20 years? Whether we want to accept it or not, the Russian Federation has invaded a sovereign country and has openly challenged NATO's borders, at least verbally. Putin has. I mean, I don't think, based off of what they've demonstrated in the Ukraine, that this is to be taken lightly. And I think right now, collective defense for NATO has never been more important, and it's going to need to be revisited on what that really looks like. And I think a lot of that will come out in Madrid. Thank you.
Thank you, General, and we'll move to the alliance force posture in the East afterwards. But before that, I want us to focus a bit on the Ukrainian armed forces performance, which lists, from a mere civilian point of view, looked outstanding, and it's going to be interesting to see how do you explain that? How do you assess this performance? The U.S. Army, alongside the British and the Canadian, as was said, but also some Eastern allies, the Balts, the Poles, have been investing a lot in training, assisting the Ukrainian forces since 2014. I think that it needs to be said here, especially if we'll look at, you compare it to and contrast it to other experience in training, equip, and capacity building, for instance, in the Middle East, which have not fared so well. Now we have a Western trained force, which is really doing great. How would you say important was this assistance? And you've seen some part of it, and what is really explained by the Ukrainian really sheer will and decision to improve their capabilities. It's impressive to compare their 2014 and their 2022 performance in defensive. And what's your assessment here, General? Maybe for. It's up to you.
Yeah. Well, I think there is one big lesson from this, and if you compare it to what we have done previously in Afghanistan, in Iraq, it's a little bit different, or for the French in Africa. I think the performance now we can observe, notice about the Ukrainians. It's because compared to the other examples I mentioned. First of all, the Ukrainian society is far more robust, educated, and open to our techniques, tactics, procedures. We are compatible culturally speaking, and this is the big difference with Afghanistan and so on. Because the Afghan, you know them better than me, but the Afghans or the Iraqis, they are very good guys, very well educated, very good officers, very good soldiers also. And it's not a matter of training, it's a matter of techniques. It's a matter of culture. And the big difference is what it has been. It works. That the Ukrainians are more European than Russians in that way, but also the Russians. The background is very good. It's far better, and it is more cohesion, homogeneity between the military, because the military is always the reflection of the society. Anytime. Having said that, I don't know exactly what is on the ground. Under the surface when it comes to the way you have trained. the Ukrainians, but I have some observation of the performance, and it could inspire us, especially the French, because the size is a little bit comparable between the two land forces. They have been very agile in the way they have used dual technologies. They have been able to they have developed a total defense concept in some ways, like the Baltic states, probably inspired by the Baltic states, and using civilian technologies, mixing civilian technologies and legacy technologies, sunset and sunrise technologies, and with not only extracting the technologies, but finding out new use, military use, and very, very quickly. The apps, the use of the smartphone anytime, and everything connected not only through military hardened CIS, but through internet. Well, it's outstanding. DA, Clearview AI, some US apps. They've used Google, Apple for the location of the Russians and so on, and they've been very good at that. And for us, it's a big lesson, and we would like for the French, and maybe we'll discuss about the perspectives, to combine more structurally, and to have this agility from now, not developing it. And it's first. The second point is about informational warfare. They've been very good, but we have to be careful also. The Russians are very good, are still very good. I come back from Africa. They are not convinced that we are more legitimate than the Russians are. And I think in Asia, it's also the case. Therefore, be careful of the focus we have. We could also be intoxicated by our own view on the situation. Just to say that, but they have been very, very, very good. And also it inspiring us. At strategic level, I will not comment, but at the tactical level. We have to be very reactive, very swift in that field. And the last point is that also they have used very classical techniques and tactics, and this combination, for me, it's outstanding, and we can be inspired by them.
General Van Wagenen, on this. I think it's working.
No, there we go. So first of all, the U.S. prior to the 24th, I say again here, prior to the 24th of February, the U.S. had a large advising mission inside of the Ukraine, the Joint Multinational Training Group run out of the United States Army Europe. That had been there since 15. The Canadians had a large advising presence in there too, and so did the British. When I was a British DCG with US3 Div, Operational Orbital. And this trained from the tactical level really up to the operational level of security assistance and training. I think those training missions prior to the invasion, they're not there anymore, obviously. They were we looked as some of the better capacity and capability building that Western countries have done mill to mill, and I think it paid dividends for the Ukrainian defense early on. I think as I go back to my point 3, this is attrition warfare. So publicly, very publicly, we see the losses of Russian leaders, generals, colonels, BTG commanders. We're not seeing that in the Ukrainians because they are running a very good information operations, and their operational security is very good. So you don't see that. You could make the assumption, based off the losses over there, that their leadership is being attrited. And that's just a fair assumption. And I say that because what many nations had done inside of Ukraine prior to the invasion, that will begin to fade because of attrition. Because this is attrition warfare, so that's I think that's some key points on the advising mission over there. Very publicly, many countries, including the one we're sitting, are providing lethal aid into the Ukraine. It's very public. It's the EU's involved in it. I think there's a lot of technical weapons going in there. And if you're not trained on how to use them, I think that will present other issues for their long-term defense.
That is a key question. How do you turn a force that was mostly oriented toward defense, and if not exclusively on defense, and we could even speak of non-offensive defense in the way that the Ukrainian forces train and their own doctrine developed into a counter-offensive, because this is what they're trying to do now, to retake Kherson, at least some parts of the south, and part of the offensive weapons and complex weapons that Europeans, Americans have been delivering to them. How do you turn this exclusively defensive force into a force that is capable of counteroffensive and retake part of all of the territory they lost? And that's a tricky one. If not, I had questions for Dimitri on the broader strategic level about the resilience of Ukrainian society. We've talked about they're taking heavy casualties. Attrition is very high, probably in the Russian forces, but also in the Ukrainian forces. But what about the rest of the society? We've seen that this is more than only a conventional war. This is kind of a comprehensive approach to war, and Ukrainians' resilience has been outstanding. In the society, we've speaking a bit about information warfare capabilities in the Ukrainian on the Ukrainian side, and this is not only the army speaking. How do they fare facing the sort of long protracted conflict that we're looking at right now?
I think that the first to be surprised by this resiliency that you mentioned are the Russians.
Close to the mic.
Are the Russians themselves. First, Ukraine. I think that Ukraine knows very well the Russian society, the Russian states, and the Russian elites, while the Russians don't really care about what Ukraine is in reality beyond the classical and traditional stereotypes like brotherhood or same people, same fate. And I think that we saw this miscalculation from Russia because they didn't understand that the classical division between Russian and Ukrainian speakers in Ukraine was not relevant in 2022. Second, Ukraine mobilized all men able to defend their territory, their families, and their goods and lands, while Russia trapped itself in a protracted and high-intensity major conventional conflict without being able to safely resort to the general mobilization. And furthermore, I think that Russia was not prepared to struggle with such opponents heavily supported by the West in terms of equipment, weapons, and intelligence. And I think that it's a tactical and moral advantage for Ukraine. The Western countries delivered to the Ukrainian army very reliable and advanced communication systems for the past 8 years, and such numerous weapons, anti-ships, anti-aircrafts, anti-armor vehicles weapons, which were very efficient against the Russian army. Third and lastly, I think that the Ukrainian society is struggling with an imperial power which denies its independency, its freedom, its specific culture and history, and above all, its right to choose its own political strategic orientation. And from that point of view, to conclude, Ukraine is what Russia failed to become. And I think Ukraine is a post-Soviet democratic society, and that's why Russia decided to punish Ukraine like Georgia in 2008, because these two countries felt closer to Europe than to their former imperial power.
Thank you, Dimitri. And I think it really needed to be said this way. And before we move to the final Q&A session, because you're going to be able, of course, to ask some questions, I wanted to have just a very brief insights on your parts about what I call the blue analysis and the adaptation of NATO, the alliance in the East. General Van Wagenen, in your future position, I mean, just immediate position that you're now took office of, you will be at the forefront of the adaptation of the force posture of NATO, especially in the East, of course. How do you think we're going to see this adaptation in the East? Is it going to be more strategic signaling, deterrence, forward defense, other kind of training and partnership, maybe combat partnership with partner nations? How do you see NATO adapting to this?
Well, I think there's two parts to it. There is the NATO adaptation post-February 24th, the invasion. I'll talk about that very quickly. And then there's going to be post-Madrid summit. And I'm not going to get in front of SAC here and the Secretary General, but those are topics of conversation for what the future will be down there. I can tell you certainly the land domain is on the docket down there, certainly. But what was the adaptation for NATO that was, I think, much more dynamic than people recognize it for? As most of you know, post Crimea, the threat to the Baltic nations and to Poland, 4 NATO battle groups were stood up in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland. Each framework nation went in there. That effort was mirrored post February 24th. There was battle groups that were stood up in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. So this was an immediate adaptation. Each of those countries will have framework nations that lead them. The first nation that answered almost immediately was France, as they led the framework nation and the battle group into Romania to take the lead down there. And then the other nations quickly followed, building their own battle groups there. So what you see is an adaptation immediately to NATO's southeastern flank that prior to the Russian reinvasion of the Ukraine did not exist. I think that's point one. So that to give you a comparison, in 2014, those battle groups up in the Baltics took almost 16 months to build. In the current crisis, some of them with the French were in place within days. What a remarkable difference there. The second thing is whether the Russian Federation wanted it or not, now there's open discussion of accession of Finland and Sweden into NATO. These are open discussions going on. They'll be discussed at Madrid. These are significant changes inside of NATO right now. I think what was NATO? It was collective defense. It was Article 5. Some of that probably got blurred in the global war on terror in Afghanistan, and I think if Russia didn't want it, they got it. Collective defense is back, an alliance of 30 nations, and the posturing and signaling I don't think could be clearer. My own commander-in-chief has said it. There's not 1 inch of ground of NATO that will be given up.
Thank you. Dimitri, how do you think that the Russians are going to, adapt to this, and what part will play their land forces as well in this answer? Because I think this is interesting here.
I think it would be a mistake to believe that the Russian military and political elites will analyze the NATO's adaptation for what it is in reality, that is a defensive initiative. I think that according to the Russian military elites, this war is a proxy war led by the West against Russia. Russia was provoked by the West, and that's why many Russian military elites will probably write that it was once again Russia overreacted in an emotional and in a counterproductive way. So I don't think that it will be a clear and a substantive analysis of what NATO's adaptation is in reality they will be blinded by the same beliefs and mindsets as always.
General Givre, how do you see the role of Eastern Flank in the future of French Army's mission here and the adaptation that we've been talking about?
Yeah. First of all, I would say that France, of course, is fully committed into NATO and has proved that it assumes all its responsibilities through the responsiveness following the attack in Ukraine and the rapid deployment of our forces. This is very important. Second point, anytime we have to keep in mind that France is a nuclear power, independent one. It also is a major EU member, and when originally we think that we are three major powers, nuclear powers in Europe, the Brits, the French, and of course the US. But in fact, we are now only two within the EU. Of course, there is a game changer with the Sweden and Finland. Dynamic to join NATO, but it is important to keep in mind that there is anytime this positioning of France that is once again not counterproductive but an asset for the US to have a complementary approach and also a dynamic if somewhere it will be committed to facing another threat, but France will be committed for defense of Europe within NATO and within the EU. This is the first point. The second point, we are all focusing on the eastern flank. That's of course this is the most serious threat for now. But never forget about Middle East. And in Middle East, we have a very close partnership, very strong partnership with United Emirates for now, and we have also we are in alert, and we have permanent forces deployed there, and we are for now on a stance facing the threat in the Middle East. Another threat, the Iranian threat, for being explicit. And we are also fully engaged and committed in Africa, in Mediterranean and in Africa. Once again, that's very important. And we want, for the French army, of course, being deployed, I think will remain. I don't know about the plan from the president, but I think will remain sometimes. Reinforce our presence. We have already done it. But also, never forget that we are the only one in Europe that can swiftly be committed in the Middle East and in Africa if something wrong happens, and it can happen. In addition to that, we are worldwide deployed with regard to France in general, but especially armed forces. We are in the Pacific Islands, the main territories, French main territories, and we are also in the Central America, in French Indies, and in Southern America. And that's a very important point. And that's why the new forces we are tailoring will be deployable forces. We have to harden, to strengthen our capabilities, but anytime we have to be deployable anywhere, in Eastern Europe, but also elsewhere. And that's in some ways a constraint or an imperative for us, and we have to keep in mind, and it's in the interest of all the Europeans and of NATO to have the French being flexible and able to commit anywhere else where the Americans maybe will not be the first because of other imperatives on their own.
Thank you, General. And it needs to be reminded as well, yes, that France is a European power, but not only a European power. Okay, we have 10 minutes for questions and answers. So if there are a couple of questions that can be formalized briefly in the audience, I'm sure that our speakers will be thrilled to answer them. Yes, ma'am, here.
Bonjour, j'ai une petite question. Pourquoi les Ukrainiens ne sont pas autour de cette table?
Okay. Well, I mean, the question was about how Ukrainians are not here. We have a great Ukrainian pavilion here, and the...
It's not correct.
Go ahead.
C'est pas les réponses. Pourquoi le russe est là et pourquoi l'ukrainien n'est pas là?
There's no Russian here, ma'am. We have Russian experts. We have experts about Eastern Europe, and we're trying to think about the adaptation of NATO and partners and allies.
Ça explique tout. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Other questions in the room? From no? Yes. See here.
To the panel, what does victory look like from a Russian perspective?
I think that Ukraine is for Russia a medium stage in the Russian plan, and I think the final purpose of Russia is to influence and to dominate Europe, and because Europe is the heart of the Russian foreign policy for centuries, because Europe is a compass for Russia to define itself, and its fundamental purpose is to destroy NATO from within, and to drive Washington out from Europe. I could just. I would like to. I would like to remind you the words of Yeltsin in 1999 in the Istanbul summit to Bill Clinton. He told to Clinton, "Give us Europe." And Putin told to Macron in 2018, "We can protect you. We can protect you." So Russia strives to become a kind of protector and a civilizational beacon of a weak and degenerate perceived Europe, according to Russians.
Just one point on this. This is one of the explanations why France is targeted by Russia, especially, despite some people could think that we are closer for cultural reasons and so on. Never forget it, and we have experienced it in Africa.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one last question. Here in the front.
Okay. Okay, so a very quick question, because we have to end the roundtable. The notion of red teaming and war games were mentioned, and General Givre, you talked about the importance of mindset. So I was wondering how, what is it done in this field, and how the war in Ukraine impact the way we are thinking about red teaming and war games?
We are developing for now the wargaming in France. It was not in our culture originally, but as the head of the Doctrine Directorate, I'm also responsible for under my umbrella. I have the Land Forces War College, and we will have our first contest, international contest, next November with a US partner on wargaming. I consider it very of a key issue, key method to avoid our cognitive bias with regard to the others. Yeah,
I think this is also a way forward for NATO at shape and a way of planning.
I think, talking from a U.S. perspective, the staff process that's taught to our officers and non-commissioned officers in the planning process, I think what looking at this conflict and reflecting on it really teaches, and I brought it up early on, is how important wargaming and red teaming is, and how important it is to have those hard conversations amongst leaders, whether they're at SHAPE or it's down in the 3rd French Division, whatever. This is essential to have a dialogue amongst our staff and our commanders, so we don't we don't fall for our own poison assumptions that I think we saw early on in this conflict. So it's tried and it's old, but I think it just proves that the staff process is important.
Yeah, just a point. I think our biggest challenge now, it's not to understand our adversaries and competitors. I think we have very good analysis. We are capable in our society to have some observers, even some native people from this country, to know about the culture. You explain it, and the problem is our internal. This is how we make very quickly the change through what we have observed in the mindset dynamics and the real dynamics of our competitors and adversaries. And that's very, very difficult. And I would just mention something, for example, for the French. We all now observe that non-kinetic at the tactical level, I mentioned at the tactical level, is very important. And the Ukrainians have proved that when good use of apps, of smartphones, you can target your enemy far quickly than with legacy assets at the scale of the French army. Once again, I don't speak about the Americans, we have so many drones and so on. And how do we integrate this change very quickly in our organization? I will tell you frankly, we will need a civilian smartphone secured for each of our soldiers. We trust them by giving them an assault rifle. Why don't we give them now, as the special forces have, just a smartphone with all the apps for targeting, for info, for secured command connections? We must trust them, and it will be far more agile. And as in a kill web approach, no more vertical IR call. This is the essence of subsidiarity. We all speak about subsidiarity, agility. Okay, then give them a smartphone in addition to their assault rifle. That could be a game changer for me.
Thank you, General, on this innovative and thought-provoking ideas. I need to conclude the panel now because we have to yield the floor. So please join me in thanking the three of our speakers today. We've done, I think, an outstanding job in helping us to enlighten us about the allies' perspective on the situation in the East and the adaptation of the alliance. Thank you.